Please welcome to the stage SRE's Senior Advisor of Research and Learning, Dr. Guila Benchimol.
Oh.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed a delicious lunch. Thank you to SRE for the wonderful and yummy food that we had this afternoon. So welcome to the Restorative Justice Triad, a session on institutional accountability and all of the different players that involves, which we will introduce you to soon. Today's convening this day is supposed to be about solutions. And so where does institutional accountability fit into what we are talking about? So we've been talking about gender equity and other forms of equity. We've been talking about safety and respect. We've been talking about policies and workplace culture. Great, we have to have all of those. But what happens when things go wrong? Are those things embedded in our policies? And so today we hope to give you one solution to what can be possible when things go wrong, if there is a willingness for that possibility, while also acknowledging that what we're going to present is not always possible, it is not always appropriate for every case, and it is not always appropriate for all of the people. But we hope that this allows us to be imaginative and creative when approaching solutions to harm that occurs in Jewish workplaces and in Jewish spaces. I'm really, really fortunate that SRE has prioritized accountability the last 4 convenings. And in 2020, I was honored to bring my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Alissa Ackerman, to I think it was our first online convening during COVID, to talk about accountability with April Baskin and Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg. And in that time, Alissa has co-founded and owns a company called Restorative Justice and invited me to be the director of faith-based and community accountability. And since then, and before then already, we have been facilitating restorative justice circles in the Jewish world, and we have also branched out into the Christian world and other faith communities. And so today we're going to talk about one example of a project, and I'm going to let others talk more about it, that we worked on for over 18 months, and we continue to work on it in various ways, which you will hear about soon. I want to name that for those of us in the room that are survivors of sexual harm or other harms, this conversation may feel difficult or triggering, or some difficult feelings may arise. We have a room staffed with a social worker, Betsy Stone, on the first floor. And please, I invite you to leave. It is not awkward to leave. You could be leaving for any reason. So please leave if you need to leave and to take care of yourself. I also want to thank SRE for funding work that Alissa and I have been leading for the last month. We have been leading a 20-person cross-denominational institutional accountability cohort, and we included in there were participants from the Orthodox world, ranging all the way to the renewal world. It was a very, very powerful cohort. We're not saying that from ourselves. We're saying it from our last session yesterday and the feedback that we got. And we hope to continue that kind of work. For those that are interested, we will be around later to talk about it more. So I turn it over now to my friend and colleague, Dr. Alissa Ackerman.
Thank you so much, Guila. So again, my name is Dr. Alissa Ackerman. I'm the founder and owner of Restorative Justice, which is an organization designed specifically to deal with restorative justice in cases of sexual harm. I'm also a professor of criminal justice and began my work 20 years ago studying sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. But my role has always been working with those who have caused harm, both individuals and institutions. And then several years ago, maybe about 10 years ago now, I had the opportunity to participate in a restorative justice process, a vicarious restorative justice process as a survivor of sexual violence. And so while I've been teaching about restorative justice for the last 20 years, it wasn't until I had that experience as a survivor where I said, I have to make this possible for other people. And very few people will take sexual harm cases because they are just fundamentally different than other kinds of harms. And so as I started talking about this work publicly, survivors started reaching out, asking if I would create processes for them. And so that's how Restorative Justice began. So I come to this work as an academic, I come to this work as a practitioner, and I come to this work as a survivor of sexual harm. In the Jewish world specifically, though, I also come having experienced multiple forms of harm in the Jewish world. And that lived experience is so important to the work that Guila and I do.
I too come to the work with lived experience of harm in my Orthodox community where I grew up and I continue to live and practice. And I left the Jewish professional world. I was a Jewish educator for over 11 years, and I left that world thinking that I was done to become a criminologist. And I remember sitting in criminology class learning about restorative justice, an approach to repairing harm, thinking, well, this is teshuvah. Like, why don't we do this? What's going on here? And I left it aside, and I started working and researching and advocating for and with survivors, while really not talking about my own harm, which I still don't do as beautifully as my friend and mentor here does. But I'm naming it today because I think it's important to situate ourselves in the work that we do. And one of the things I noticed in this work around restorative justice, and I called Alissa on this, and I said, in the Jewish world, there's something different going on when it's come to survivors and repairing harm. There's not much of an appetite or an interest on either side, the person who was harmed or the harm doer for sure, for the harm doer to come back. They don't seem to be taking accountability. They don't seem to be welcome if they do take accountability. That path is right now feels really closed off. But I think that there's an opening for the institutions whose survivors say, I expected more of you. How could you betray me in this way? I don't want to leave. I left. I don't go to shul except for 3 times a year, and I'm an Orthodox woman living in an ultra-Orthodox community. I don't want to leave. I want to be part of you. So I expect more of you. And I said to Alissa, I think there's a window of opportunity here to repair the harm between institutions or leaders that betrayed those who were harmed on their watch and by them as they disclosed.
So it's important, I think, not only have we situated our lived experiences, I named that I primarily work with those who have caused harm, and Guila primarily works with those who have experienced harm. And so we've really pushed each other as friends and as colleagues. There are times where she will say to me, I don't understand this. And I'll say, this is how harm doers behave. Or I'll say something and she'll say, no, this makes sense for people who have experienced harm. So it really is a beautiful partnership. Now, in a moment, we're going to introduce the 3 people on the stage, our Restorative Justice Triad. We want to talk a little bit about the Very Narrow Bridge Project, which is the Restorative Justice Project we ran for the URJ. I just want to name, before we introduce the people that are on the stage with us, I want to name Missy Johnson, who's in the room with us. She's the General Counsel, and I hope I get this right, the Vice President of People and Culture at the URJ. And so much of the day-to-day work we did on this project was shepherded by Missy. And so we just want to honor you in the room. So I'm going to turn it to Guila to talk a little bit about the Very Narrow Bridge Project.
So in, I think it was July of, what are we now, 24? So of 2022, Missy reached out to me and asked if we would consider doing some restorative justice work. And I said, well, I have my colleague Alissa, we do this together. And even then there was this doubt, can the person that is known to work with harm doers be involved in this project? And I said, well, there was a lot of harm caused here, right? And we're not just asking the survivors to do all the work, and we need that dual role. I talked last night about leaning into duality. We're going to do that a lot today in the next hour. And so I said, yes, we can do this, but I got to bring in my colleague Alissa. And the URJ cannot be the holders of that process because you don't know what restorative justice is. And so we worked for 18 months. We conducted listening session with survivors. First, we needed to know, do survivors want the URJ to repair harm? Even if they didn't, the URJ still has a responsibility to do so, but do they want to be involved? If they want to be involved, what are the needs? How could we potentially meet them? So we conducted listening sessions with survivors, we conducted listening sessions with the URJ and with their Ethics Accountability Task Force, a task force that was put together in response to the investigation that had been previously conducted. And we outlined over there survivor needs and ways that the URJ can meet them.
So let's talk a little bit about the Triad. So Guila named that we did listening sessions with survivors, we did listening sessions with the URJ. The third piece of that Triad is the community. So another person who made this possible is Rabbi Mary Zamore, who is on the stage representing the community and the advocacy work that went into making this project possible. Of course, we have Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is representing the URJ and the institution responsible for what we call secondary harm. Right? And it's really important to name that survivors will tell you that secondary harm isn't secondary, that secondary harm feels as difficult as primary harm. And what we know from the literature is that that secondary harm, that institutional betrayal, actually makes the impacts of primary harm worse. And we have Rabbi Marina Yergin, who is here representing the survivor voice.
It is also important to name that in this lab that we are having today, we are inviting you all as listeners, as part of the community. We want you to listen to this and say, as community members in this triad, what can we take from here to make possible in spaces we know that harm has occurred? What can we make possible from here from what we learned? Don't let it stay in this room. And we need to thank the URJ because you are experimenting too. Alissa and I have been in many Jewish institutions, especially in the last 2 years, but very few let us talk about the work and very few let us talk about the work publicly. And the fact that the URJ is taking the risk to do this and that survivors and Marina, Rabbi Marina Yergin, you're taking the risk to do this publicly, it is a risk. And thank you for your bravery.
So after we listened to survivors, after we listened to the URJ, we wrote a report. It is a public report about the needs that survivors have. One of the most important needs that we heard over and over and over again was that survivors wanted a public accounting. They wanted an apology for the harm that was committed at the URJ. They wanted the URJ to take ownership of those harms through what they called a full-throated amends. In restorative justice work, we use the term amends instead of apology because amends are active and sometimes take a very long time to live into. But an apology is very passive, right? It's, I'm sorry that I harmed you. An amends is, this is the specific way that I harmed you. Here's what I've learned about those harms. And these are the steps I'm taking, or that we're taking to ensure that doesn't happen again. The URJ heard that. And before Yom Kippur of last year, Rabbi Rick Jacobs issued that full-throated public amends. And then beyond that, in January of this year, we had a public webinar that Rabbi Yergin was a part of. That was a public webinar for people to come listen to what we've been doing with the URJ. We also held private conversations with survivors and members of the URJ. And we hold monthly survivor circles that we continue to do. Just to check in, sometimes we have specific prompts, specific questions, but it is a space for survivors to come together and be seen by other survivors.
So before we get into the questions with our esteemed and really honored panelists, I also want to name that the URJ, to their credit, expanded the work that we did to include other forms of harm. And this is the safety, respect, equity convening, right? It wasn't just about the lack of safety. We also heard about racism. We also heard about just discrimination. We heard about homophobia. And that was to their credit. They said, we don't want to be narrow in our approach to repair. We want to be as expansive as possible. So these are just little nuggets of learning when we think about what we're going to take from this lab to make possible in our lives. So Rabbi Yergin, we would like to invite you into our triad, into the conversation, and you will be witnessing this circle. So Rabbi Yergin, I know that you are not representing all of the voices of those that were harmed, but you are here as a representative of a survivor that was harmed, and we really thank you for being with us. Can you talk about your role in the URJ Restorative Justice Project? What did it entail, and how did it evolve over time?
So I want to start, I'm going to kind of shout out my non-C-suite meeting group yesterday, and I want to talk about some of the privileges that I bring to being to this stage. So I'm here as a survivor. I don't represent all the survivors. I am a voice who has done that, but I don't represent every single person's individual story. I am a cisgender, heterosexual, white person, grew up in a middle-class family whose family could afford me to go to Jewish summer camps and reform programs. So I definitely have that privilege. I'm a congregational rabbi, which brings its own privileges to the conversation as well. But I am coming to this work with the URJ as a survivor of child sexual abuse at a URJ camp when I was 11. So I entered into this space as a survivor from being able to speak as for my 11-year-old self that didn't get that voice then. So all of the other identities, the literal and figurative hats I wear are to the side. I want to talk about me coming here as a survivor. I spoke with Debevoise and Plimpton, the law firm that the Union for Reform Judaism hired. I corroborated my story with a number of people before I came to make sure that my 11-year-old self was not imagining something different. I gave my report, then ACT, which is a group of community organizers who came forward and distributed a list, and it stands for, they are accountable, community-focused, and transparent, and asking the URJ to do that, sent out around a petition asking people to sign to ask for those things. There were over 500 people who signed. It was a big deal, and then nothing happened. So the second step was some of those community organizers reached out and said, okay, clergy, can you write an individual letter? And they said, here's an example of a letter that you can write. I said, that's nice, and I wrote my own. So I wrote my own with my own story. I sent it to the leadership of the URJ, outlining what happened to me, and what I stated in it is that I used to be proud of saying that I grew up in the Reform movement and that I'm a product of the Reform movement. And where we are today makes me not very proud. And I want to make this movement better for my kids and for the future, so that when they say I'm a product of the Reform movement, they say it with pride and with conviction. So that's how I came into this space. I also want to just note that after my intake interview with Debevoise and Plimpton with the law firm, I pretty immediately called Rabbi Mary Zamore to talk and debrief things that had happened within that call, some new things that came about, because when you're a survivor telling your story to people, new things come about. And she has been a champion and a mentor for me for years before this, but as a community member, she has been there from the beginning, and for me personally, and I know a lot of other survivors.
So you've talked a little bit about why you wanted to participate in this project. Did the project feel survivor-centered, and how did it change over time?
So after I sent that letter, I had individual Zoom calls with URJ leadership and staff, Rick being one of those people. And one of the things that he pointed out to me that I had never really thought of was that it was pretty amazing that not only I stayed in the movement, continued to be involved, but then became a rabbi in the movement and a congregational rabbi in the movement. And I never had thought about it like that. And that was really amazing for me to hear and understand, and then to be able to say, now what do I do with that? And how can I move forward with that? And I'm not done. I was asked if I could be on a committee task force. I was on that. I was one of the only non-North American board members. There were a couple of other rabbis in there, and I didn't feel like it was going anywhere. And I was really disappointed. And it came to a head when I felt like there was a conflict of conversations that I was having in some spaces and different conversations happening in that space. And I felt that institutional harm. And I felt really another layer of secondary harm. And so what I did was I called them out the URJ as a whole by calling them in. So I wasn't just calling them out and saying, sit back, deal with what I just said, but I said, I'm willing to have this conversation. I'm willing to continue. I'm willing to put in the work, but I'm telling you that what you are doing is wrong and not okay and inappropriate. So the thing that I have really learned through this process is that calling out by calling in, if you do one and not the other, you're missing a piece. And institutions put up their walls, right? I mean, we're humans, and in pastoral counseling, I say, as soon as you say you, the other person is going to put up their walls. It's the exact same thing with an institution. If we are only calling out and not calling in, nothing is going to happen because those walls are coming up. However, if we are not creating spaces that are safe and respectful, then we can't have a process where people can say, I messed up. Let me see what I can do to help figure out to say sorry, not wait for a survivor to come forward. And this process really started out with a lot of survivors having to have the heavy load to do that work. And that was stressful and taxing in a number of ways. And I think as we went on, and I ended up coming, because of my multiple emails, I ended up coming to the core team where we were meeting on a weekly or every other week basis for a couple of hours. I mean, I was doing this work on top of my congregational work a couple hours a week so that I could be here and be present. And between the healing circles from my survivor side and then working from the leadership perspective, it was a hard line to toe, but it started to shift to become more survivor-centered because there was a survivor at the main table who was saying, all right, and it feels weird to say that about myself, but I'm sitting there saying, this does not feel right. This is not okay. I understand what you're trying to do, but I need you to hear how it feels and what it sounds like. And I think once those conversations actually started happening, then we started to see a shift.
And Marina, we have to thank you because not only have we embedded into our checklist of readiness for institutions to have a survivor at the leadership table from the start, a project that we just started with a large church only began when we had a survivor at the leadership table with the pastor. So that is to your credit. Trademark, Rabbi Marina Yergin. So the last question we want to ask until we invite Rabbi Rick Jacobs into the Triad is, you said before that it was taxing, that there were times that this was taxing, but you also talked about what you learned. And so can you talk about what the impact of being involved in this project in this multiple hat way has had on you as an individual?
So I think one of the pieces you mentioned, I don't remember which one of you, the January piece that we had a webinar, and right after it there was a healing circle for the URJ staff with the survivors listening in, which was really powerful. And it was like 4 hours of Zoom in a row. And I was sick, like physically ill about the second session, not the one in front of people, but trying to hold that hat, right? I have been in the healing circles as a survivor. I had been in the leadership meetings as a survivor representative. But to toe that line was something that was so anxiety provoking. I didn't want anyone to feel that I was there and misrepresenting them as a survivor, that what my story is what everybody's story is, and how do I balance that? It was really hard, and the support of the survivors has been incredible, and I also, the support of the URJ in continuing to do this and receive my very blunt, not always nice, happy emails has been also really helpful. It's been powerful to be in these places, to be able to speak from this perspective, and it's exhausting. I'm not sitting and telling my survivor story. That would bring a whole nother level of exhausting. And why do we as survivors have to be the ones who keep coming forward and doing the work? The amount of emails, the amount of phone calls, and I said yes to it, right? Ampersand, and this idea of having to hold it all and being that survivor representative is exhausting in a mental, in an emotional, in a physical capacity. And I'm honored to have been able to do this, and I feel extremely supported by the survivors that in our healing circle and things like that. And it's nerve-wracking, right? I mean, I'm on this stage with two incredible women and mentors for me, and two huge leaders of the reform movement, and me. And I keep being told, don't think that way, okay, whatever. But it feels different. And I'm honored to be here and to be able to grow in this capacity and to have learned about restorative justice, which I knew only from a criminology kumbaya perspective. But to see it in work and in practice, I have learned so much.
Thank you. Rabbi Jacobs, if you could join us. Shift. So a little bit about choreography. We will now be in conversation with Rabbi Yergin and Rabbi Jacobs. Then we will switch seats, and Rabbi Zamore will join us in conversation. So Rabbi Jacobs, why did the URJ initiate this project, and why did you decide on a restorative justice approach?
So I have to begin by saying, first of all, I'm sitting on a panel with remarkable teachers and mentors and guides. So I just need to say what each of you has meant to me as a rabbi, as a person, and as a leader of the URJ has been extraordinary. So thank you for the guidance, thank you for the truth-telling, thank you for the agitation, thank you for the love that leads to better. So let me just start with that. I think it was clear to us that a legal investigation was needed, but how in the world would that be adequate for an organization that is built on Jewish values, on Jewish commitments? There was a whole deeper layer that we had to get to. But to be truthful, it wasn't entirely clear. Yes, we had heard about tshuva. It's kind of a big thing in our world. But it turns out that restorative justice isn't exactly, if there's a Venn diagram, tshuva and restorative justice overlap. It's not the same thing. There's a whole world for us to both have learned and then found the skill and the confidence to sort of activate. So in that commitment, I know it was Missy who reached out to the two of you because we wanted to figure out who were the right people, who were the people who could guide us, who could take us on that journey, who would push us, but also help us, educate us, all those things. And clearly, the two of you have been those guides to us. And here we were, this complex, large organization, spread out over all of North America with all these different facets. And there wasn't sort of a template to say, okay, here's what you do when it's 1.5 million people and 14 overnight camps and 850 congregations and a justice, center in DC. Here's at a youth movement, here's what you do. But you knew the components. And so we knew we had to go deeper and we need to have the wise counsel. And I'd also just say, Mary has been the longest guide in this process. So early on when we were just, Mary, what? And the wisdom that flowed forth from Rabbi Zamore, just extraordinary. And the courage for you, Rabbi Yergin, just extraordinary. I don't know what you're talking about, the two of us. You have had such unbelievable backbone and clarity and putting yourself in this. So we entered this process with the right people. And again, not a straightforward path once we entered it, but it felt like this was essential. Because the need to be directly engaging with survivors. I mean, you can't do this from some remote place. It's hard, but it's necessary, and I think that's the part that we needed, and we were helped into it. And I think I feel awkward sitting here somehow that the class is over. There was grades were already it was a final exam. We did the grades. We're still very much learning and doing, but we are so committed that this is core to who we are.
So you're talking about the learnings, and we did a lot of learning together with URJ leadership privately. A lot of this work is invisible. People don't see it. But we had a lot of very deep sessions. We learned about restorative justice, about survivors, victimization, primary harm, secondary harm, institutional accountability, harm doers, all of that. What would you say were the major learnings for you?
First of all, the first thing was how much there was to learn. I mean, like, we're all students. We're part of this, those of us who are part of the Jewish community. This was an enormous and really, I would say, profound and deep subject area. I'll also say what we learned is that in working and listening to survivors, there's just not this like, you can have a GPS, it's not going to take you in a straight line. And it was frustrating. Like we were like, we got a problem, let's fix it. Well, can we start fixing today? Like, not today. We have to first learn. But first, you had to build trust with the survivors, because survivors were not saying, we want to come be part of this. We are feeling our harm deeply, even if it was decades ago. So it was hard, and then I would hear very contradictory things like, how come you're not speaking up? You need to, put out messages, write more, speak more, and then at the same time, you shouldn't be speaking at all. You shouldn't be making videos. You should be acting. So it was like, okay, doctors, Benchimol and Ackerman, whose voices? And the answer is both. Both, because again, we had to get clear about that words were not enough, clearly. We know that from the Jewish tradition, to show up at shul on Yom Kippur, bang your chest and say, okay, I'm done. We know that doesn't constitute tshuva. So what actually is going to be that work? So that was a big learning about how it had to all go. I also think we had a lot of learning about secondary harm. And it wasn't book learning. Like why, like to be in rooms and to be the person, it might have been the harm took place 40 years ago, but I am the president of the Union for Reform Judaism. I am the stand-in for the harm doer. And what we weren't doing, not what we're trying to do, but what we were not doing was so harmful. It was re-traumatizing survivors in a profound way, including for us to have, still had honored people, in plaques or in certain things. That was also part of the secondary harm. So it was like a whole, to really see what we were doing and how it was key. The really painful reality was there were people who left not just the Reform movement because of their harm, they left Judaism. They could no longer feel like this community could be a community for them. And to think, and one, I remember the story of like raising a family but not wanting anything to do with the Jewish community. So the layers upon layers of this harm were just excruciating to hear, to know that it is pure truth, and that we have to not only go through this process, we have to be a different URJ. We have to be a different Jewish community, and that's a lifelong commitment.
So this question is for both of you. What were your hopes as you persisted through this project? And in what ways were your hopes met? And in what ways were they disappointed? Go for it.
We had hoped to move quickly and to go deep quickly and to get to the other side quickly, because the pain was so real and the hurt and the harm so present. And the disappointment was that not only were 18 months, but 18 months didn't take us all the way to where we needed to go. But the hopes that did actually materialize was that we would have the tools to continue and to go and to have some confidence that we could actually navigate, and we couldn't eliminate that there would ever again be harm in our midst, but that we would not countenance it. We would not sort of go into that same, organizational, we know how to sort of avoid. So that was a hope that actually was very much fulfilled.
I wanted things to change. I didn't want it to be fast. I wanted the depth. I wanted the perspective. I wanted the understanding. I think for my own personal, I wish that there had been some kind of solution. So in my situation, the URJ did not even know about what happened. The camp never reported it up. So their first learning about it was my interview with the law firm. So, and I think exactly what Rick said, this is not a case of if another situation is going to happen, it's when. And when another situation happens, I mean, I'd love to be optimistic and say it'll never happen with humans, it's going to happen. What is the infrastructure? Where are we going? How are we doing this? And not just, okay, we're going the legal route, we're going the police route, that kind of thing, but also what are we doing for the survivors? Where is the making sure that they are getting the psychological and mental and emotional help that is needed from the situations that they're coming from. And I think that the disappointment is that I feel like we keep starting and we get somewhere and then it stops and it stalls. And then we get somewhere and then it stops and it stalls. And the lack of communication through all of this with the entire world, not just the reform movement, but everybody, has also been really frustrating. So even if there are things, and I was in those meetings, so I knew there were things happening, but it wasn't being portrayed to other people. So it felt to other survivors who were not at that table that nothing was moving and nothing was happening, and that is so disconcerting. And this isn't just, let's make sure we reach out to like alumni list, but the donor list. The world, and that is a scary thing for an institution to do, but no one is going to learn about this or find that safety and respect within an organization unless it is out there. And that has been a continual disappointment, is the communication and the stop-start and the push from the survivors to make things start again.
And I don't know if everyone in the room is feeling it. Like, if you need to take a deep breath, take a deep breath. I am just so moved right now. So please, take a deep breath to center yourself. But this is radical. Institutions don't communicate about this work because it is scary and it is a risk, and they are not celebrated for it because they make big mistakes, as we are being very open about today. But this is radical, and I just want us to pause and notice that. So Rabbi Jacobs, Rabbi Yergin said that she had hoped for change. I want us to lean into that for a minute. And can you talk about what changes the URJ had hoped to make during the project or after the project, and what changes you're still hoping to make, while we know that nothing is perfect and nothing is done?
So the first thing I'll say is the work that we felt was absolutely on the top of the list was prevention. We had a clear sense of what had gone wrong over the many, many years. And right now, as we're sitting here, we have thousands of staff showing up at all of our 14 overnight camps, our Israel travel, yes, even in this moment. And so we felt very much, and Missy led this brilliantly, that we needed to rethink and redo all of that. We needed to train, even the part-time staff that come for just the summer. They are going to be the front lines. They're going to be in those cabins. They're going to be working with all those. So we needed to really immediately address that, as well as lines of communication and reporting. I mean, we're a large, sprawling. How does someone, bring a complaint? How do they even know? So that was, very much on our mind as a beginning place. We hired an ombuds. That it wasn't enough that we had internal reporting. People know, Missy is the vice president for people and culture. We needed a safe other reporting mode that people could call, could reach out to, and that ombuds is still in place and is active. So we needed very much to do that. We also wanted to be trained, and I think we definitely feel like that was and is ongoing. I think, to be honest, the horizon in front of us is to transform our organization, not to make changes, to transform, so that safety, respect, and equity is everywhere, all the time. And by the way, that should be the Jewish community's, North Star for all of us. And until that point, we have a cloud over us to not be who we're supposed to be. We're also we're working with I'm seeing, amazing movement partners here at this conference. We're working with a whole movement that is doing some of the hardest work that's been done, and we're doing it. We have to do it in separate lanes because we're separate institutions, but we're very much thinking of our total impact on this work. We also, I think, down the road, we have harm doers who want to be in restorative justice processes with their survivors. Not every survivor, or most survivors, want to do that, but we want to have the strength and the muscles to go into that, because you've helped to get us ready to do that when appropriate, never to pressure anyone, but that feels important. We also feel to have clergy pastoral counseling, particularly for those who have been literally kind of pushed from Jewish life. So all those things and more, as well as making sure to be kind of rethinking everything by virtue of what's working, what's not working. It may appear that there were kind of moments where we weren't doing a lot. I don't remember a moment when we weren't doing a lot. We did not do a great job, and I'll just own that. I'll own all of what you said and just say thank you for holding us accountable. But I do think that there's just there was so much to do, and yes, is it scary to communicate? Yes, but over-communicating with an organization as large as ours, if you say something once, you didn't say it. If you say it twice, you really didn't say it either. If you say it 10 times in all settings, you may begin to start to get the word out.
Thank you. So as we come to our time together before we invite Rabbi Zamore to join us, now that the formal part of our work together has ended, what is your hope for survivors that were harmed in the URJ?
I hope, I pray, I try to act every day that they could find peace and wholeness and confidence that the URJ that they experienced is not the URJ that is anymore. I hope that they will find places of beauty and meaning and acceptance and safety and respect and equity in our movement and in Jewish life. I just hope there would be healing and real repair. And I don't think, obviously, that's a simple thing. But what the survivors, the thing that's most weighing on me and all of us is the pain the survivors carry every day, and that we, as the URJ, are the ones who perpetrated that harm. There's not a day that doesn't weigh on me, but I know it doesn't weigh on me the way the survivors are experiencing that. So I want survivors to know that about the work that we are not doing because we're being forced to do it or we're being, publicly shamed to do it. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and it's hard, but there's no getting from where we are to where we need to be without doing that work. And I want the survivors, I want the wider community, I want those who are sitting here as part of an organization thinking like, well, we're not going to do that. People have said to me, Rick, I'm really sorry about what you're going through. And I look at my colleagues and I say, I'm sorry that you're not doing the work.
Amen. Amen to your hope for survivors. Rabbi Yergin, what is your hope or wishes for the URJ?
I hope that we can, and I say we, right? It's like, again, the weird line. I hope that we can be a place that people can call out by calling in a way that they are not afraid of their jobs. They're not afraid for retribution in any way, that they feel that they can find Jewish spaces, whether that's the camp, but also the synagogues, utilizing the things that are being put in place for the camps, for the synagogues. And I know the synagogues are their own thing, but how are we moving those tactics for the camps that the URJ really is over into the congregations? I hope that there is continued listening to survivors and continued work and serious work on communication. There hasn't been much since the project has officially ended, which has been very disconcerting. And even though I'm in conversations, it still feels like it's moving at a glacial pace when we had so much oomph for a couple of months. And so that push and pull, I hope I'm pulling and making that happen so that things can be better for the movement as a whole.
Amen to that too.
So we are now going to switch seats and have Rabbi Zamore join us.
And the rest of the community members of the Triad.
Thank you so much for being in conversation with us. You were so pivotal in bringing the URJ to the table to do this work. You've been pivotal in the Jewish world to move people toward accountability. And while you didn't have a direct role in the Very Narrow Bridge project, I just want to say that I am tremendously grateful to you for your counsel to me personally. And we are tremendously grateful for the counsel you offered as we were navigating this project at the outset. You've spoken years ago with us about moral injury and institutional accountability before any accountability efforts in the reform and other movements began. And we know that you are a trusted friend and colleague to us, to many survivors, and to institutional leaders. So can you tell us a little bit about what you foresaw years ago when you started thinking about accountability in the movement? And what was the moral injury you saw, and what were you thinking about?
Like Rabbi Jacobs, I want to recognize our institutional partners, and Rabbi Hara Person and Rabbi Rachel Maimon from CCAR and from Hebrew Union College. I deeply appreciate your partnership and your being here and your participation always in this work. My narrative starts with being first-year student at Hebrew Union College in Israel. I'd gone directly from college graduation to 30 days later landing in Israel to start that first year. And within a few weeks, one of my dear friends came to me and said that she had just been sexually harassed by the president of Hebrew Union College. This was in 1991. And over the course of that year and the years that came, more and more stories were told to me through tears, in women's bathrooms, in corners. Sometimes they were as warnings: don't go near, don't be alone with. Sometimes they were just someone reaching out in humanity to another person. My family today, now that I'm a mother of a 24-year-old, it represents 5 generations of people participating in the reform movement. And I am a rabbi in the reform movement. And so I have that duality of being someone who is female identified, who has traversed all the institutions of the reform movement, and has experienced the daily quotidian harms that women experience in every space in the world, and bore witness to what my friends and colleagues were telling me, whether they were rabbis or other Jewish clergy or professionals or lay people. And what I started to notice within those narratives was, first of all, the repetition of names of harm doers, but also some of those narratives were also married to the words, I don't know how much longer I can stay in this community. And some of them were actually walking out. And on the other side of that, what I've seen over the decades was the unwillingness of both individuals and the institutions and the community to live with that very hard space of self-identity. The reform movement is known for the openness, for our social justice platform, for our egalitarianism, a place where women were being ordained in 1972. And this is so incongruent with that. So it takes, in terms of that moral injury, there's moral injury to the harm doers, those who are harmed, to their family and friends and bystanders, and in some ways to those who have to be in the accountability process, who are not the harm doers, but have to be the representatives, for them to be able to take that harsh look at who we are as a community and say we've done wrong and we're not living up to who we're supposed to be. And I didn't even have the words for moral injury years ago. I was thinking about it as some sort of theological harm because I also heard God language in there. And it's only in really the recent 5-10 years that I gained that understanding of how we could use language about this.
So this is no exaggeration. I don't think there's a week that goes by where I don't hear Rabbi Mary Zamore is the biggest champion for whomever.
Well, I just want to say, I'm the executive director of the Women's Rabbinic Network. And therefore, when you hear Mary Zamore, you need to hear the co-presidents, the board, the workers, the women who years and years and years ago, now 52 years ago as of January 3rd, forged that path, who clung to each other, who created WRN in order to create a support system, who treasured each other's very hard stories, picked up each other off the floor and dried off each other's tears, and pushed each other forward. So, when you hear my name, it's not my name. It is a collective. Plus the many experts like yourself, like Fran Sepler, like Sharon Goldstick, who have taught me and given me vocabulary and skills. So please hear that and that.
Well, your humility is amazing, and it is a mutual learning. Thank you. But that sentence is, Rabbi Mary Zamore is a champion for survivors, for women, for rabbis, for leaders. And many times, community members, of which you're representing today, they don't want to get involved in the muck. They don't want to get involved in the mess. Actually, the research shows that the number one reason why bystanders don't get involved is if it will put them or their job or their reputation at risk. So can you talk about how do you maintain the trust of survivors and the trust of leaders while pushing leaders to look in the mirror that does not look really clean sometimes? How do you balance that and still have your role and trust on all sides?
Well, in some ways, it's not by design. I mean, honestly, I don't think any of us would have predicted that the three major institutions of the reform movement would have been in a huge accountability and repair process. And certainly the Me Too movement, starting over 6 years ago, gave a lot of fuel to this, even though the roots are long, long before then. I think that the reality is that everybody here is a stakeholder in the Jewish community. And we're talking specifically about the reform, religious branch of Judaism. And it's an important model. And the thing that I really want is people just to look at this model and say, we can do this. And that's really important to me. But I think that my skills as a rabbi have allowed me to be the listener on both sides of this equation. I want us to succeed. I want there to be whatever healing is available. And I know for many victim survivors, there isn't healing available. But whatever healing can be done, I want it to be done. I want our institutions to be better and to live up to the values that they taught me, that they raised me in. There are a lot of really good people involved in this work, a lot of good people. And in many ways, this is a sad story, but it's a success story too. And I want all of these people to do this work as well. We all have to do this work. We have to celebrate the survivors who come forward. We have to be willing to listen to everything. We think that these narratives are about the most dramatic stories. They're not. They're about the smallest interactions. And those are the things that we have to be addressing all the time. And we're all capable of that. And that's really the bottom line. We're capable of that. And we're capable of also looking at our partners and saying, it needs to be better.
So this next question speaks to exactly that. What thoughts do you have around efforts at calling in versus calling out in the Jewish community about harm and accountability? Is there room for both? And what benefits and drawbacks do you see of each?
Calling out is really hard. That's honestly the truth. And just as Rabbi Yergin spoke so beautifully about the privilege that she has allowed her to be in this role at this moment, and I too hold a lot of privilege. And at the beginning of the most intense phase of all of this, when WRN did speak out publicly, that journey most honestly started with my husband and myself having a conversation saying, if this is the end of my career, so be it. Yeah. So be it. Because I didn't know how it was going to go. And part of the reason why people talk about Mary Zamore is because at WRN we made the conscious decision that I, who was beyond mid-career and had had successes and felt like that was complete and was in a place of privilege, that I could be that face. Because the other leaders were not with that privilege. So they had careers ahead of them. But I think things have changed now, and I think that's also important to hear. This is not words of caution, this is the opposite. That's saying that if all of us care about this and there's an SRE to support it and to be a guiding light and to do this work, then we can both call in and we can call out. Hopefully it is mostly calling in. Mostly it is the organizations themselves, as Rabbi Jacob said, and so many of us, we've heard over the last 2 days, of the organizations themselves saying, you know what, we either have historic problems or we have current problems or we don't want to have future problems and we want to do this work now. And we want to be an example to the Jewish community rather than a headline in the Jewish press. And because the truth will come out eventually, and it might as well be in your control to do it right.
I love what you said about this being a success story, and I can feel like even my own eyes rolling, right? Because it is a success, and it's a really messy success.
Messy.
The fact that there is a repair process is not a sign of brokenness. It's a sign of leaning into the Jewish values of the organization to acknowledge the truth, the harm, and to try and make attempts at repair. Harm happens in every single one of our spaces and every single one of our lives. And leaning into the truth, even if that truth is ugly, does not make it a failure. It just makes us honest. And it's hard to be honest, so thank you. I'm curious, as a community member watching not just your movement, but other movements struggle with accountability, what gains have you seen in the Jewish world around accountability, and what gaps would you say still remain?
Well, the gains are that the processes, the resources, they're here, right? They are here, and much of it thanks to SRE for building those. For the people who are running the organizations, like yourself, like many others in the room, and for those of you who are doing the hard work and doing it. That is on our side, and the examples that are being built as each of us are doing this work. The challenges are that there is a lack of transparency. That if you're not willing to be transparent about what you're doing, to publish the investigations, to talk openly about the harm that has been done, then you're not doing all the work. And that's the honest truth. And we acknowledge that the pull towards protecting yourself from reputational harm is so great, and the silencing nature of the Jewish community, that's all of us, is so great. Yeah. And we have to work together to overcome that and to own it. And that's the only way it's going to be real change.
So what do you want the community to know about the intersection of restorative justice and Jewish values?
That it is an important tool among many important tools. That it is natively aligned with tshuva, with doing repentance, with that transparency, that honesty. And unless you're really willing to hear directly from victim survivors the harm that is done and how it falls on them, then you're really not ready to do accountability. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
So we're coming to our close. What you saw here was a brief encounter of the different parts of the triad, right? The survivor, the institution that caused harm, and the community. And we're just so grateful for the three of you for being a part of this, and to all of you who got to witness what a circle could look like, what a restorative justice circle could look like.
This conversation was hard, and this conversation was heavy, and this conversation was real. So you have a break, I believe until 2 o'clock, is that right? And the panelists will be available for taking some questions. But I want to name, I hope that the survivors and the URJ and all those who were harmed and all those who caused harm, who we always want to invite to processes if they are ready to take accountability, and to the community members who watch and were also harmed in that watching, have courage to keep standing on that narrow bridge. The bridge is rickety, but we can stabilize it if we stand on it together. This work takes funding. We will never charge survivors. It is our North Star. That's why SRE funded a whole learning cohort, but this work takes funding. It is resources that organizations spent money on investigations. They're spending money on crisis communications. And then we come in and say, so by the way, repair is going to cost money too. And we'd really like you to pay for survivors' mental health needs because you can't expect them to engage with you and not take care of them in that way. It takes money, but there are ways to do this, and we invite you all to continue being brave together. Take a deep breath, do what you need to take care of yourself in the next half an hour or 25 minutes, and we are here for questions, but we are grateful to you, and we are super duper grateful to you.